Now I'm gonna stop that for the minute. Oh. Who's there? What a while.
Okay,
What's going on with having people come in?
Come in here, yes, it's the only place that's gonna be shown. We're getting our people together and, well,
start, shall we wait till?
well, no, go ahead, just.
In here.
Yeah, everybody come in here.
Yep.
You thought you started without us.
No, we're just trying to make it work. You know, but well, we got some chairs, they don't need a lot. I mean, 4 people out there. Hey, how we doing? Congratulations, come on in. We're having the usual technical difficulties.
Oh, no.
Wonderful all the time with all these wonderful electronic things.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we got.
You were told to bring it, that's why we did.
Yeah, well, that's okay. I think for this. Anybody else out there?
If you running,
Okay,
you want to sit closer?
Yeah, maybe we should.
so, yeah, find a seat, come on in, sit down.
Oh, fellow Luna, I love that story.
Yeah,
yeah.
That's come on in. Come on in.
Get started? Okay. Everyone feel free just to shuffle around as you need to. I'll get started, so.
More on this side, there's more chairs.
But the light.
Just do the one on the right, on the side, you know, one, yeah, that one. Yep, that's better.
All right. So like Dave said, my name is Halie Larkin. I'm a wildlife biologist with DCR. I specifically cover state forests and state parks. And today I'll be talking about.
This favorite, yeah.
All right, so just to get us all on the same page about what bats actually are. So they're mammals. They're more closely related to humans than mice. They're the only mammal capable of true flight, so flying squirrels do not count. They are in the genus Chiroptera, which literally means hand. So you can see the anatomy photo there on the right. That is a human arm, a bird wing, and a bat wing. And what you see there at the bottom with the bat wing is essentially their wing is just a really large hand connected with dermal tissue. And you can see that there in the X-ray at the bottom where you see the shoulder, the elbow, each of the fingers, and the wrist. So two really important identifying features of this group are that, like I said, they're capable of flight and they use echolocation, which I'll talk about later. There are over 1,400 species of bats worldwide. 75% are insectivores, but some eat fruit, pollen, fish, frogs, lizards, birds, and even other bats, like you can see in some of the pictures there on the right.
Can I ask to turn these overhead lights
Oh,
on?
yeah, go
Yeah.
to the other one out, Shelley, if you
All
want.
right behind you.
And there are only 3 species of
Yeah.
sort of that classic vampire bat that everyone thinks of. So these are the bats that are drinking blood. They're only in Central and South America. So these are 2 very different sized bats. The one we have there on the left is the flying fox with a wingspan of up to 6 feet.
Oh.
The bat on the right is the Kitti's hognose bat, and it's also known as the bumblebee bat. And you can see it's very, very tiny. All right, so a little bit more on echolocation. This is what bats use to catch prey and navigate with. And with echolocation, they can tell distance, size, and texture of the object that's in front of them. But keep in mind, this is ecomorphological in function, so very similar to how birds have different beaks. So some birds have bills for wading in water, some have really long beaks for probing in the sand. So it's something that's not really so much of a territorial type thing like a bird song. It's actually something that they're using to catch prey and navigate. And really what echolocation is for bats is just echoes of their own ultrasonic calls. So throughout the night, they're just call, listen, hours on end. And there are 3 different types of calls. So the search is more of a coarse type of call where they're just navigating around. It's sort of just broad information. Then we have the approach calls. This is when they're starting to detect something and they want to get a little bit more info. So they're doing about 20 pulses, 20 to 30 pulses per second. And then lastly, we have the terminal or feeding buzz. So this is where they want to get the most fine scale information possible. So they can do anything from 5 to 200 pulses per second. And hopefully this video will play. These are two bats that we have here in Massachusetts, although this video is from out in Colorado. And I'm not sure if we'll have volume or not. We do. Let's see. Brown bat, this is 20 times. So we see our core calls getting. And then our second bat here, brown bat, it's a higher frequency call. Again, it calls more space out, and they get together. And then that terminal, is there at the end. So, all right. So to break down little brown bat a little bit more, just to give you an idea of what they're doing in any given night. So, for example, they're having a pulse rate of about 20 pulses per second. So that's that call, listen, call, listen. They have a perceptual window of about 26 feet, so they can't characterize their echoes indefinitely out into space. So it's about 26 feet in front of them, but they're flying, you know, forward at 16 feet per second. So that means in front of them, they have just 1.6 seconds of perceptual time, which means that they have less than 1.5 seconds to determine what is in front of them at any given time while they're flying in the night, in the dark. So just keep that in mind with, you know, how fast they're flying and how quickly they have to respond to everything that's going on. In Massachusetts, we have 9 species of bats. So you see the common name there on the left, starting with big browns and then hoary bat at the bottom. Those 3 bats at the bottom, silver-haired, eastern red, and hoary bats, are all migratory. So they do not overwinter here in the Northeast. They'll head south for the winter, but the top 6 will be somewhere in the Northeast. We're not exactly sure where all these species go, but 2 of these species, the northern long-eared bat and the Indiana bat, are federally endangered. So they're listed under the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Endangered Species Act. And then the little brown bat and the tricolored bat are being considered for federal listing. So, you know, 4 of 9 species that occur in the state are being considered for federal listing. All right, so what are bats doing while they're here in Massachusetts? So generally in the summertime, you know, April/May to September/October, the bats are roosting. And they can roost in trees, foliage, houses, caves and mines, artificial locations like a bat house. So you see the image on the bottom right is bats in an attic. And sometimes these can be very large colonies, and I'll touch on 2 of the colonies that we have later, but you know, we're talking in some instances, thousands of individuals roosting together. So bats have a pretty cool breeding ecology. They breed in the fall, so they'll all kind of congregate to where they're going to hibernate. We'll, in this example, use a cave, and they're all swarming outside of the cave and breeding. But the female actually stores the sperm in her uterus throughout the winter via a process called delayed fertilization. And then when she emerges in the spring, she'll go through ovulation and fertilization in April/May. So pretty cool that she's storing that sperm throughout the entire winter and then going through ovulation and fertilization. She'll be pregnant throughout mid to late June and give birth to a pup, usually a single pup. The 2 species there on the right, the eastern red bat and the hoary bat, are actually 2 species that can give birth to more than 1 pup. But for most of our myotis species, so that's northern long-eared bat, eastern small-footed bat, little brown bat, they usually give birth just to 1 pup. And they become volant, which just means that they can fly by mid-July. So pretty quick turnaround. You know, she's becoming pregnant in April/May, pregnant throughout June, and then the pups can fly usually by mid-July. And then lastly, for the winter time, generally this is obviously when they're hibernating. And bats, like many wildlife, actually don't go through a true hibernation. So even though their metabolic, heart, and respiration rate are dramatically decreased, so they can go from 200 to 300 beats per minute in their heart to just 10. And sometimes they can go several minutes without taking a breath throughout the winter. they actually experience periodic arousal. So every week or so, they're waking up. And this accounts for up to 90% of the total winter energy that they use. And it's not 100% known why they wake up all the time. It's thought, maybe they bring their body back up to sort of normal temperature every now and then. All right, and then just shifting gears a little bit to talk about some of the things that people associate with bats. And unfortunately, one of those is rabies. So rabies is acute progressive viral encephalitis. Generally speaking, there are 55,000 deaths worldwide, but between US and Canada, there's less than 1 death per year. So not very common, obviously, in our neck of the woods. And it's transmitted generally fluid to fluid. So this is blood and saliva. And surprisingly, greater than 99% of rabies deaths worldwide are due to dogs. So the map there on the top right shows important host species for rabies in different parts of the world. So you can see in our area, that's more like raccoons, skunks, foxes, but other parts of the world, you see a lot more dogs. And here in the US, raccoons have the most positive rate at 14%. So the map there at the bottom is showing important mesocarnivore host species here in the US, and that green color represents raccoons. So here in the Northeast, raccoons are the greatest, carrier of rabies. And this isn't to say that bats can't get rabies, but it's at lower rates than raccoons, skunks, or foxes. So just keep that in mind when you might have this, predisposition to believe that if you see a bat, it's like 50-50 that it has rabies. That's not really true. If you saw a raccoon, skunk, or fox, they're just as likely to have rabies as a bat might. All right, so very timely for this month, public relations and mythology here. So the image on the left, you see kind of the spooky bats coming out of the haunted house at night. Oftentimes bats are associated with sort of the sinister and evil things. And then obviously Dracula there on the right certainly doesn't help that idea, but just kind of touching on some of the sort of preconceived notions that folks might have about bats. So one big threat to bats is misinformation. So I'll go through a couple things that people often think about when they think of bats. One being that they're blind. So I actually did a bat count at Lake Wyola 2 summers ago, and you'd be surprised at the number of people that said, wait, they have eyes? Yes, bats do have eyes. It's thought that they can see in black and white and maybe some color, but they actually have just as good as vision as us humans have. So on top of echolocation, they can actually see quite well. Bats do not seek you out and fly into your hair. At one time I took this bullet point off, and then I actually got this as a question of, will bats try to fly into my hair? So I felt that I needed to put it back in here. So keep in mind that perceptual window of time in front of them. Sometimes it feels like a bat might be coming right at you if you're outside. They're great navigators, but they just have to respond, on the fly very quickly. Bats are not flying rodents. So like we mentioned, they're more closely related to humans than they are mice. They only have generally 1 pup per year. They're not just pumping out kids left and right. Bats do not want to drink your blood. 75% are insectivorous. We only have 3 species out of the over 1,400 that actually do. And bats are not dirty and full of disease. They actually groom themselves and others extensively. And here is my next video. Mom back here, just
It's okay with me, go ahead.
Okay, so unfortunately, the biggest threat to bats at this time is white nose syndrome. So this was first detected in Albany, New York in 2006 and very quickly spread. It's caused by a fungus that has a super long scientific name, so most people just call it PD. And this is a cold-loving fungus, and it penetrates the dermal tissues of the wing and face of the bat. Unfortunately, it interferes with torpor while the bats are hibernating, and it causes death in early spring. And it does only impact our hibernating bats. So to give you a real life example, here in Massachusetts, This is what a bat looks like with white nose syndrome. You can see that white fungus growing on the face as well as the wings. There's even a little bit there on the ears. So millions and millions of bats have been killed throughout North America. The most severely impacted species are the little brown, northern long-eared, and tricolored bat that have all experienced greater than 90% decline. But in a lot of cases, 99% or even 100. So to give you an example, here in Massachusetts, there's a Mass Wildlife Hibernacula out in Chester. Used to have 10,000 little brown bats in 2007, 2008. White nose syndrome came through, and the following winter there were 14 bats left. So we're talking about 10,000 down to 14, definitely greater than 90% decline. And this is just piles of bats on the floor. So it's a pretty insane die-off. When you think about wildlife going endangered, it's usually much slower. This was pretty rapid. And there are a couple other species impacted. So our big browns, our eastern small-footed, and our Indiana bats, but not quite as severely as those first three that I mentioned. The other threat to bats is wind. So unfortunately, what's good for the atmosphere is not always good for the ecosphere. Most are killed during migration, so they're actually physically hit by the turbine as it's spinning. And the species with the highest mortality are our three migratory bats. So that's the hoary bat, silver-haired bat, and the eastern red bat. And so makes a lot of sense, right? These are our migratory species, so they're covering large distances, and they're the ones that are coming into contact with these wind farms. And as far as offshore wind goes, there's thoughts that maybe it's potentially less, causing potentially less impact, but you can't really find a bat body in the ocean, so we don't really know for sure, but hopefully offshore wind isn't quite as bad. And then, like most wildlife, habitat loss and degradation. This can come in the form of urbanization, agricultural expansion. But something to keep in mind, sort of what we talked about earlier, bats might roost in trees, but then maybe they forage in a canopy gap or over streams, and then maybe they hibernate in a cave. So all those are really different locations where the bats hang out. So it can be really difficult to protect bat habitat because there are so many different types. Similar to birds, hibernating into different parts of the world, we can't kind of protect everything, unfortunately. And a little bit more on forest management and bats. So forest management is not the same as deforestation or urbanization or agriculture expansion or really conversion. So for forest management, we're talking about intentional management of the forest, by a trained professional forester. And bats actually use forests across a wide range of management activities. Nearly all bats in North America use forests for some part of their life cycle. Forestry can increase bat activity, especially by increasing edge. So bats will forage along forest edges, over riparian areas, along forest roads and trails, in harvest created or natural forest gaps as well. And then lastly, threats for caves and mines. This is a critical threatened ecosystem. We don't have a ton of caves and mines, specifically here in Massachusetts. And although most of the time the bats are wintering in these locations, they can also roost in these. So some bats will hang out here in the summer. And generally speaking, the temperature increases as distance from the entrance increases, and bats will distribute themselves accordingly. So the image there on the top right, the different colors represent different species of bats. So some might like to be near the entrance and some might like to be way in the back. And, it's just a species specific preference. Another threat is flunking or people exploring caves, which isn't inherently bad. It just can be an opportunity to spread disease. This is how white nose syndrome can spread, or the fungus that causes white nose syndrome. And it can also disturb bats. And then lastly, mine closure, even if obviously done for public safety reasons, if not done at the appropriate time of year, there could be bats hibernating inside, and then, obviously they get trapped. All right, so now I'm going to talk about what we're doing here at DCR when it comes to conserving and managing bats. So first is our acoustic surveys, and we use song meter SM4s. They're basic, of course, acoustic recorders. The image there on the bottom right is what the recorder looks like, and that's attached to a flagpole, which has a microphone cable and then a microphone at the top. And essentially this recorder is just listening for echolocations of bats. And this is to collect baseline species occurrence information. And what's really cool is I've only been in the position since 2023, but the folks before me have been deploying these detectors across the state since 2015. And what's extra cool is that, again, right before I came into the position, the biologist before me applied for a grant and had all of that data processed into this really cool acoustic report to actually tell us where these bats are in Massachusetts. And the image there on the right, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with bird mist netting. So to catch bats, we use mist netting as well, but we oftentimes stack 3 nets on top of each other. So much taller than a typical bird mist net. And you'll see we're in this picture over top of a stream. So bats use streams, roads, trails to travel along. Some do like clutter and will travel, in cluttered locations as well. But just like us, path of least resistance, they use these trails, roads, streams to travel throughout the night. Okay, so in 2024 and 2025, we did a statewide mist netting effort, the first that had ever been done here at DCR. And we decided to focus on site-specific results for this mist netting and tracking effort. The table there at the bottom is sort of showing a snippet of what this report looks like. So you see site name there, that Will 1 stands for Willowdale State Forest, the year of 2018. And then from EPFU all the way down to PESU at the end, those are the 9 species that we have here in the state. The third from the right, mice, is northern long-eared bat, and you see that red 7 there. And so essentially what this researcher did was take any northern long-eared bat or Indiana bat calls and manually vet them to kind of say, do we really think this is a northern long-eared bat call? And so the red means that it was determined likely present, purple would mean potentially present, and green would be, hey, after review, I really don't think that's a northern long-eared bat call, and the classifier got it wrong. So given that northern long-eared bat, we do also supposedly potentially have Indiana bat, but they haven't been seen in the state since 1930. So we decided to use northern long-eared bat as sort of our species to target in 2024 and 2025. The image there on the left is just showing the cover photo of the report, and it's really tiny so you can't see it, but it's hot off the press of June 2025. And I've actually been on maternity leave, so I haven't even read the whole report. But this map here on the right is from the report. So these are all the locations that we netted in 2024 and 2025. You can see we tried to go for a pretty good geographic distribution. So all the way from Mount Washington State Park up to Halibut Point and over to Nickerson. So some of those results, we have Quabbin Reservoir there at the top. So we have site names listed on the left, Beartown State Forest at the bottom, and then number of captured bats. So the longest bars would be those locations that had the greatest number of bats. And so big brown bats are dark blue, eastern reds are orange, eastern smallfoot are green, northern long-eared bat is the light blue, little brown bat is the purple, and silver-haired bat is the light green. And so in total, we caught 285 bats across our 15 sites. The most was big browns. Then we had 81 small-footed, 17 eastern reds, 11 little browns, 3 northern long-eared bats, and 1 silver-haired bat. And what's really cool, which I think is most relevant for this group, is that Quabbin Reservoir was the only location that caught a silver-haired bat and also accounted for 10 of the 11 little brown bats that we captured. So definitely a cool site there. Halibut Point is also a cool location. So we caught a ton of eastern small-footed bats there, which was really neat. So here's some photos of the bats that we captured. So starting in the top left, we have a northern long-eared bat. Below that is an eastern small-footed bat. Moving to the right at the top, we have an eastern red bat. Below that is our silver-haired bat from Quabbin. Moving right again, we have a big brown bat with the nice smile there at the top. Below that is the little brown bat. And then on the far right, we have another northern long-eared bat, but you'll see that little green thing on its back with the antenna sticking out. So that is our transmitter. So that was glued to the back of 3 northern long-eared bats and 1 eastern small-footed bat. But if you're familiar at all with bat tracking, they are tricky and they get these off pretty quickly. So unfortunately, we only were able to track 2 northern long-eared bats. So one northern long-eared bat we never found again, and the eastern small-footed bat we never found.
I was
after
need such a
race.
long antenna is that? That antenna is like 10 times the size of the
Yeah,
bat.
right. So it's really the only way that we can track them manually that way. Luckily, it's flexible, so when they move in and out of stuff, it just bends. So the first tracked northern long-eared bat was at Willowdale State Forest, and this was a non-reproductive female tracked to an American elm snag. That's the red circled area that you see there. And so once the bat was tracked back to the snag, an observer sat around the base of the tree at dusk and actually counted the bats coming out. And they counted 16 bats coming out of this. So the assumption would be that hopefully those are 16 northern long-eared bats roosting in this, which is, I mean, that's a federally endangered species. So that's really, really cool. And then on second night, they didn't observe any bats coming out of the tree. So bats are hopping around from different trees throughout the night. Our second location is from Nickerson State Park. This is in Brewster, Mass, sort of along the Cape there. And this was a pregnant female that was tracked back to 2 houses. So the bat was actually roosting in the trim overlapping shake shingles. And if you see this video here, if you keep your eye on the top left part of the screen, you see the bat actually coming out of that trim overlapping the shake shingles. And so what's really cool is that all the houses next to Nickerson actually look just like this. And on the second night, we tracked the bat back to a residence just a couple doors down. And the residents were kind enough to let us count the bats coming out. So at this particular location, on the first night, we counted 13 bats. And the second night, 0. And then the second residence, we counted 3 bats. So it's kind of really cool to think that maybe the bats are hopping from house to house. You know, at any given night, one house is sort of the place to be, then they go to a different house and maybe back. So pretty cool. All right, so for our sort of standard maternity colony monitoring, these are also known as emergence counts. It's like the same thing of what I described. It's sitting at the base of that tree. These are done in the summertime, so May through August, and this is for us to assess population size. So the video there on the right, my head is up against the shed, and I'm using edge of bone as this line. Once the bat can also see it, I count it, and the other bats go by. And you can also hear my clicker in the background. The tricky part is when you're counting bats, when the pups are beginning to fly. So you have an out clicker in one hand and an in clicker in the other hand. So you don't double count. And sometimes they're in and out and in, and you're trying to, you know, dual click with your hands. It gets a little tricky, but it's pretty cool. So this is the first colony that I'll talk about. This is at Moore State Park. So you see the image there on the bottom left. That's basically the angle that the video was taken from. So I lay beneath the window. This is the only spot in the shed that the bats can come out. What's really cool about this shed is that it was intentionally built for bats in 1991. So the blueprint there is on the bottom right. And this is likely the largest known little brown bat colony in the Northeast US. In 2025, we recorded 1,500 individuals. So, you know, you're laying there with a clicker and you're counting 1,500 bats coming out in just a span of, you know, 2 hours, maybe. It's really cool. And then the images that are there at the top are what it looks like inside of the shed. If you look up, we have roost modules. And if you really squint, you can see some of the bats actually have bands. So those little silver C's that you see are actually bands that some of the bats have on from a previous biologist that had banded them. And in January 2024, we decided to replace this wall of the bat shed. So it wasn't necessarily, you know, critically going to fall apart, but this shed is, you know, as it was built in 1991, and we just wanted to make sure that the bats had a great, you know, house to come back to. And so I fortunately was able to work with some awesome foresters, as well as some awesome ops staff who, gosh, they were very quick. I stood back and took photos. I did not do a single part of this. They were like a well-oiled machine. Took the old wall down, put the new wall up, and this was all using DCR harvested wood. And this is what that wall looks like today. And then we also put stone at the bottom of the wall to prevent that water from splashing up. So pretty cool. Our second maternity colony is at Lake Wyola State Park. This is in Shutesbury. So this is what we'd call a new colony as of 2023 when we first started looking into it. But based on the smell and the amount of poop, which is also known as guano, in the house, the bats have been here for quite some time. There's approximately 400 individuals at this location, but they are much more difficult to survey because they come out of just about every nook and cranny of that house. And it's a very old house. There's a lot of nooks and crannies. And a project that we took on this summer, this is what the attic used to look like. So you see lots of guano piled up. There's really not a floor up there in the attic, and then the steps are absolutely covered. And again, working with our awesome foresters, they geared up and they actually went up there with a vacuum and they cleaned up all the guano on the steps as well as all the spots they could reach in the attic. And then they worked to install a floor up there, again, using DCR harvested wood. This is what the floor looks like up there now. And the floor was installed so that we could put in roost modules. So this is what we have in our Moore State Park shed, and the bats at Lake Wyola do not have this. So we thought it'd be really beneficial to try to give the bats a little bit more roosting structure. So the bats will just roost in between all of those slats. And this is what it looks like installed. So the image there on the right is actually, they had to use a pulley system to install these because they were so heavy. And they actually did come back and put some more support beams there to help hold it up, just because these are massively heavy roost structures. But again, just kind of another example of, you know, me as a biologist being able to work with our foresters to, you know, do some really cool stuff for wildlife. And this is just a really fun video. So this is a thermal monocular that we used when we initially started surveying at Lake Wyola to try to figure out where the bats were coming out of. So this is what we humans would call a boarded window, but what bats would see as a perfect location to drop out of at night. So the yellow spots there are heat signatures of different bats. You'll see a different angle coming up soon, where some kind of poke out and they go back in. The red is actually like their mouth and their eyes. So the thermal monocular was really cool to kind of see the bat behavior, you know, throughout the night. So you can see the eyes there really well. But just a cool piece of technology that helps us at night. All right, and lastly, we have our hibernaculum monitoring. So the image there on the left and the right are actually from a Mass Wildlife mine. They're kind enough to let me go out with them and help teach me about bat ID in the winter. And then the image there on the center is me, and that is me going into one of our DCR hibernation locations. And here's some images of some of the bats hibernating. So the top left photo, you have two little brown bats on the right, and then you see those really big ears. That's our northern long-eared bat. So these are the only locations that have northern long-eared bats hibernating in the entire state. And these were just discovered in 2024 and pretty cool. So the piles of bats that you see are almost all little brown bats as far as we can tell, but they're pretty tricky to count because this is on, you know, 10 feet up in the air and you're trying to count NID. So it's kind of our best guess, but pretty cool to see those clusters of bats and try to count them and ID them. All right, so how to support bats. So you can help educate and advocate by dispelling myths and fears. I actually laid some books that out in front of us that we can look at after we're done. But you'd be surprised at the number of books out there that have a lot of, you know, scariness associated with them with bats. So, you know, when you're talking to friends or family and they're like, oh my God, bats are so, you have rabies and they're so scary and they're gonna drink my blood, you can be like, whoa, not true. You can also report colonies of 10 plus bats to Mass Wildlife. They have a reporting survey on their website. You can also become a volunteer bat monitor. So in 2025, they posted, I saw it on their Instagram. I don't know if it's posted on their website or Facebook or anywhere else, but they listed about 8 towns that they were looking for bat monitors to sit at their bat boxes and count any bats that might be coming out, so something to keep your eye on there. You can also build or buy a bat house, but you'll want to follow best management practices for installation to give it the highest likelihood of becoming occupied. You can also leave snags, which are dead or dying trees. So obviously you don't want to leave anything close to your house that's dead or dying. But if you have, a number of acres of woods and you can leave some of these trees, especially ones that have really nice cracks and crevices that have sort of decayed over time, those are perfect roosting locations for bats. And you can also reduce pesticide use if possible. Bats are obviously, throughout the night catching insects. So the more the merrier for them, but also, it's not too fun to be outside getting attacked by insects all the time. These two PDFs are actually the same thing. So the one on the left is just the shortened version of the one on the right. These are hot off the press as well. I think they came out in 2024. The one on the right is, I think, over 100 pages of best management practices for bat houses in the US and Canada. And then they realized that a lot of people don't want to read 100+ pages. So they made the condensed version there on the left, which is only about 6 or 7 pages. But you'll see the 3 species they cover are big browns, little browns, and Yuma. We don't have Yuma myotis, but we have big browns and little browns. So if you're really interested in bat houses, that would be a great resource to look at. All right, so wrapping up, why should any given person care about bats? Our little brown bats, for example, can eat more than 1,000 mosquito-sized insects in a single hour. So think about 1,500 bats, 1,000 mosquito-sized insects in a single hour. They're eating multiple hours of the night. That just really, really adds up pretty quickly. In other parts of the world, bats are responsible for pollination. They're a good indicator species, so they do respond to management, when we create canopy gaps or natural canopy gaps. And they also have widespread distribution. So I mentioned there's over 1,400 species worldwide. Bats, just generally speaking, have intrinsic value and worth. So I don't think I have to speak to this group too much about the importance of a random moth or a random bird or a random turtle or a random snake. But, all of these, species are important for whatever reason. We don't always know, but they're, critical to their ecosystem. And like I mentioned, many of these species are significantly declining. So 2 species in our state are already federally endangered. 2 more are being considered. And 8 of the 9 species that we have here in Massachusetts are listed under the Massachusetts Endangered Species Act. So all but the big brown bat are listed here in the state as well. And with that, I will be happy to take any questions, and I was happy to present because October is Bat Appreciation Month. So.
Can we turn on the light?
Yep, we can do that. And our apologies for our people at home. We are having a little technical difficulties, so we're going to have a little hard time responding to anybody online. So
Yep.
I think we could go ahead and stop the recording at this point. Anyway, so to make it
Stop
easier to,
recording.
we'll